The Urantia book, section 3, The History of Urantia, paper 66, The Planetary Prince of Urantia. The advent of a Lanonandek Son on an average world signifies that will, the ability to choose the path of eternal survival, has developed in the mind of primitive man. But on Urantia the Planetary Prince arrived almost 500,000 years after the appearance of human will. About 500,000 years ago, and concurrent with the appearance of the six-colored or Sangik races, Caligastia the Planetary Prince arrived on Urantia. There were almost 500 million primitive human beings on Earth at the time of the Prince's arrival, and they were well scattered over Europe, Asia and Africa. The Prince's headquarters, established in Mesopotamia, was at about the center of world population. 1. Prince Caligastia. Caligastia was a Lanonandek Son, number 9344, of the secondary order. He was experienced in the administration of the affairs of the local universe in general and during later ages, with the management of the local system of Satania in particular. Prior to the reign of Lucifer in Satania, Caligastia had been attached to the Council of the Life Carrier Advisors on Jerusalem. Lucifer elevated Caligastia to a position on his personal staff, and he acceptably filled 5 successive assignments of honor and trust. Caligastia very early sought a commission as planetary prince, but repeatedly, when his request came up for approval in the constellation councils, it would fail to receive the assent of the constellation fathers. Caligastia seemed especially desirous of being sent as planetary ruler to a decimal or life modification world. His petition had several times been disapproved before he was finally assigned to Urantia. Caligastia went forth from Jerusalem to his trust of world dominion with an enviable record of loyalty and devotion to the welfare of the universe of his origin and sojourn, notwithstanding a certain characteristic restlessness coupled with a tendency to disagree with the established order in certain minor matters. I was present on Jerusalem when the brilliant Caligastia departed from the system capital. No prince of the planets ever embarked upon a career of world rulership with a richer preparatory experience or with better prospects than did Caligastia on that eventful day 500,000 years ago. One thing is certain: as I executed my assignment of putting the narrative of that event on the broadcasts of the local universe, I never for one moment entertained, even in the slightest degree, any idea that this noble Lanonandek Son would so shortly betray his sacred trust of planetary custody and so horribly sustain the fair name of his exalted order of universe sonship. I really regarded Urantia as being among the 5 or 6 most fortunate planets in all Satania, in that it was to have such an experienced, brilliant and original mind at the helm of world affairs. I did not then comprehend that Caligastia was insidiously falling in love with himself. I did not then so fully understand the subtleties of personality pride. And whom this is that is speaking, that is a marvelous Melchizedek of Nebadon. This is the I that the I is referring in the text. So if we hear I, it refers to this Melchizedek of Nebadon. And so even Caligastia also had this personality of pride in him. So he was the second actually that had this. First, Lucifer, the sovereign system ruler of this Satania system, to which Urantia is part of, he had a tremendous pride issue in him, and then this Caligastia figure. So we are being, you can say, double attacked because of pride, and actually 3 times because Adam and Eve, their default was not, also actually in a certain way pride, because impatience is a part of one of the roots of pride too. But so at least 2 times the peoples of Urantia have been undergone 2 leaders that were tremendously and heavily induced with this personality problem of pride. And so that is why pride is so tremendously still alive on this planet, and why so many things are being done out of pride. 2. The prince's staff. The planetary prince of Urantia was not sent out on his mission alone, but was accompanied by the usual corps of assistants and administrative helpers. At the head of this group was Caligastia, the associate assistant of the planetary prince. Caligastia was also a secondary Lanonandek Son, being number 319,407 of that order. He ranked as an assistant at the time of his assignment as Caligastia's associate. And know that we also are registered on under a number in Uversa. The planetary staff included a large number of angelic cooperators and a host of other celestial beings assigned to advance the interests and promote the welfare of the human races. But from your standpoint, the most interesting group of all were the corporal members of the prince's staff, sometimes referred to as the Caligastia 100. And it could be that we are dealing with the descendants of this Caligastia 100 group that are still rebellious, and in their rebelliousness they are trying to lure as many as possible God's children into their evil and dark schemes, such as the so-called green agendas that are completely based on greed and to have more power over the rest, and also have just one goal in it, and that is complete destruction of everything that God has created, inclusive the human race, animal life and nature life. These 100 rematerialized members of the prince's staff were chosen for embarkation on the Urantia adventure. Each one of the chosen 100 was from a different planet, and none of them were from Urantia. These Jerusalemite volunteers were brought by seraphic transport direct from the system capital, which Jerusalem is. Jerusalem is the system capital of, and I will see this, our local system of Satania. So these Jerusalemite volunteers were brought by seraphic transport direct from the system capital to Urantia, and upon arrival they were held enseraphimed until they could be provided with personality forms of the dual nature of special planetary surface, literal bodies consisting of flesh and blood, but also attuned to the life circuits of the system. Sometimes before the arrival of these 100 Jerusalem citizens, the two supervising life carriers resident on Urantia, having previously perfected their plans, petitioned Jerusalem and Edentia for permission to transplant the life plasms, or the life plasm better said, of 100 selected survivors of the Andon and Fonta stock into the material bodies to be projected for the corporal members of the prince's staff. The request was granted on Jerusalem and approved on Edentia. Accordingly, 50 males and 50 females of the Andon and Fonta posterity, representing the survival of the best strains of that unique race, were chosen by the life carriers, with one or two exceptions. These Andonite contributors to the advancement of the race were strangers to one another. They were assembled from widely separated places by coordinated thought adjuster, direction and seraphic guidance at the threshold of the planetary headquarters of the prince. Here the 100 human subjects were given into the hands of the highly skilled volunteer commission from Avalon, who directed the material extraction of a portion of the life plasm of these Andon descendants. This living material was then transferred to the material bodies constructed for the use of the 100 Jerusalemite members of the prince's staff. Meantime, these newly arrived citizens of the system capital were held in the sleep of seraphic transport. These transactions, together with the literal creation of special bodies for the Caligastia 100, gave origin to numerous legends, many of which subsequently became confused with the later traditions concerning the planetary installation of Adam and Eve. The entire transaction of repersonalization from the time of the arrival of the seraphic transports bearing the 100 Jerusalem volunteers until they became conscious, threefold beings of the realm, consumed exactly 10 days. And they refer here to the book of Genesis, this beginning story about Adam and Eve. That story is completely incorrect and distorted. And as we now know, creation didn't take place in 6 days. It took a bit longer time for that, and that is why God himself, as well as Christ Michael, and who is of course the son of, and the paradise creator's son, created through God the Father and the eternal Son, they have sent this fifth epical revelation to earth so that the record can be set straight again, because they find it very much of great importance that the children of God get a far in-depth background of this planet, how this planet came into existence, how the first life forms came into existence, and how the first human beings came into existence, and how the first governmental systems came into existence, and so on, so on. We have the right to know the truth. So this idea about Adam and Eve, and that Eve was out from the rib of Adam, that is not really true. Adam and Eve were already existing for many thousands of years, were thus already thousands of years old, had already 50 children in Jerusalem, the capital of the Satania system. And through seraphic transport they came to Urantia, and yeah, the seraphims have a technique that they can dematerialize and then rematerialize. So the deep sleep that the Bible is speaking of, that Adam came into a deep sleep, is all about this deep sleep that we all come into if we are being transported from one world to another world. When we end our lives here on this planet, we shed off the flesh, and then we go to the first mentioned world. We come into a deep sleep, and eventually when the time is there, then we will be reawakened in special halls of resurrection, and then we go into the next step of our path of ascension. And when we have to go travel to other worlds, we all do this through seraphic transport, and we we do this not consciously. We are being brought into a deep sleep so that we do not have to go through everything that is that has to do with this transportation. So here we see that they refer to the Bible as, this is not really complete. The Bible is a book that contains a lot of distortions, especially the Old Testament is loaded with distortions, and it is not a book that is coming from God himself. It's not representing in any way, shape or form God's word. There are good things into it. You need to sift the Bible and take out what is good and leave actually the distortions aside. And then you can still in a certain way read the Bible, but as a matter of fact, what I've said already so many times, and it's not actually me that is saying this, it is God the Father that speaks through me. He wants us to grow beyond the Bible and to make real contact with him. We have God in us. It's about time that we start making direct contact with God the Father himself. Jesus, when he had a problem, he didn't run to the bookshelf to pick up the Torah and scroll through it and see, oh, now I have to recite this text the whole day and then my problem is fixed. No, what Jesus showed us and taught us was, if you have a problem in a situation, you're facing obstacles or struggles or whatever, take a moment, go to a place where it's quiet, where you are not being disturbed, and go into deep communication with the Paradise Father, whom we know better as God the Father. And as soon as you really feel that you have all the information that you need to know, then you go on and you go back and do the things that you left behind for a while. You pick them up and you will then experience how the information that came to you will do its thing while you are continuing the things that you were doing. All right. 3. Dalmatia, the city of the prince. The headquarters of the planetary prince was situated in the Persian Gulf region of those days. in the district corresponding to later Mesopotamia. And it could be, and this is a big question mark, that this Dalmatia, this city of the Prince Caligastia, is confused with Atlantis. And it could be that this Atlantis city that Plato was describing is in actuality the city Dalmatia, the city of Prince Caligastia, that one day came completely underwater. Because that city was highly evolved, advanced, and so on. So that covers what Plato has discovered and has spoken of and written about. So this could be that this Atlantis is not called Atlantis in actuality, but is in actuality Dalmatia. This could be. Don't pin my words on it. It's just something I just get right now in my mind. So the headquarters of the Planetary Prince was situated in the Persian Gulf region of those days, in the district corresponding to later Mesopotamia. The climate and landscape in the Mesopotamia of those times were in every way favorable to the undertakings of the prince's staff and their assistants, very different from conditions which have sometimes since prevailed. It was necessary to have such a favoring climate as a part of the natural environment designed to induce primitive Urantians to make certain initial advances in culture and civilization. The one great task of those ages was to transform man from a hunter to a herder, with the hope that later on he would evolve into a peace-loving, home-abiding farmer. Partially, this idea has been succeeded. Unfortunately, at the moment we live in a time and age where there's everything being done to destroy farmer life and to destroy completely family life. And this destroying of family life is almost succeeded. Almost. And that is also why they have evolved these false green agendas, so that they have a reason, a tool, a method to attack farmer life and to ruin completely and destroy completely the farmer life. But we all know, without farmers we have no real food. Without farmers we cannot live. They are very, very important. Agriculture is very important. And if you ask me, I truly believe that not many people are waiting to for eating in laboratory created food, which has no life in it at all. So I proceed. The headquarters of the Planetary Prince on Urantia was typical of such stations on a young and developing sphere. The nucleus of the prince's settlement was a very simple but beautiful city enclosed within a wall 40 feet high. This world center of culture was named Dalmatia in honor of Caligastia. The city was laid out in 10 subdivisions, with the headquarters mansions of the 10 councils of the corporal staff situated at the centers of these subdivisions. Centermost in the city was the Temple of the Unseen Father, the administrative headquarters of the prince and his associates was arranged in 12 chambers, immediately grouped about the temple itself. The buildings of Dalmatia were all one story, except the council headquarters, which were 2 stories, and the central temple of the Father of all, which was small but 3 stories in height. The city represented the best practices of those early days in building material. Brick. Very little stone or wood was used in comparison to nowadays, where the focus is more and more laid on building things of wood instead of bricks. We should actually think about this and ask ourselves the question, why is the focus these days so much on building things from wood? Why is this? So we should contemplate on that question. Very little stone or wood was used. Home building and a village architecture among the surrounding peoples were greatly improved by the Dalmatian example. Near the prince's headquarters there dwell all colors and strata of human beings, and it was from these nearby tribes that the first students of the prince's schools were recruited. Although these early schools of Dalmatia were crude, they provided all that could be done for the men and women of that primitive age. The prince's corporal staff continuously gathered about them the superior individuals of the surrounding tribes, and after training and inspiring these students, sent them back as teachers and leaders of their respective peoples. 4. Early days of the 100. The arrival of the prince's staff created a profound impression, while it required almost 1,000 years for the news to spread abroad. Those tribes near the Mesopotamian headquarters were tremendously influenced by the teachings and conduct of the 100 new sojourners on Urantia, and much of your subsequent mythology grew out of the garbled legends of these early days, when these members of the prince's staff were repersonalized on Urantia as Superman. So there comes the story of Superman and Superwoman. The serious obstacle to the good influence of such extraplanetary teachers is the tendency of mortals to regard them as, between quotation marks, gods. But aside from the technique of their appearance on Earth, the Caligastia 100-50 men and 50 women did not resort to supernatural methods nor superhuman manipulations, but the corporal staff were nonetheless superhuman. They began their mission on Urantia as extraordinary threefold beings. 1. They were corporal and relatively human, for they embodied the actual life plasm of one of the human races, the andonic life plasm of Urantia. These 100 members of the prince's staff were divided equally as to sex and in accordance with their previous mortal status. Each person of this group was capable of becoming concurrent to some new order of physical being. But they had been carefully instructed to resort to parenthood only under certain conditions. It is customary for the corporal staff of a planetary prince to procreate their successors some time prior to retiring from special planetary service. Usually this is at, or shortly after, the time of the arrival of the planetary Adam and Eve, the material sons and daughter. These special beings therefore had little or no idea as to what type of material creature would be produced by their sexual union, and they never did know before the time for such a step in the prosecution of their world would work. The entire regime was upset by rebellion, and those who later functioned in the parental role have been isolated from the life currents of this system. In skin color and language, these materialized, better said, members of Caligastia staff followed the Andonic race. They partook of food as did the mortals of the realm, with this difference. The recreated bodies of this group were fully satisfied by a non-flesh diet. This was one of the considerations which determined their residence in a warm region abounding in fruits and nuts. The practice of subsisting on a non-flesh diet dates from the times of the Caligastia 100, for this custom spread near and far to affect the eating habits of many surrounding tribes, groups of origin in the once exclusively meat-eating evolutionary races. And they also didn't need meat due to a double circulatory system in them that also could eat the fruit of the tree of life. And so they did not have to eat that much materialized food, so to say. 2. The 100 were material but superhuman beings, having been reconstituted on Urantia as unique men and women of a high and special order. This group, while enjoying provisional citizenship on Jerusalem, were as yet unfused with their thought adjusters, so they didn't have any. And when they volunteered and were accepted for planetary service in liaison with the descending orders of sonship, their adjusters were detached. But these Jerusalemites were superhuman beings. They possessed souls of ascendant growth. During the mortal life in the flesh, the soul is of embryonic estate. It is born between brackets resurrected in the Morontia life and experiences growth through the successive Morontia worlds. And the souls of the Caligastia 100 had thus expanded through the progressive experiences of the 7 mentioned worlds to citizenship status on Jerusalem. In conformity to their instructions, the staff did not engage in sexual reproduction, but they did painstakingly study their personal constitutions, and they carefully explored every imaginable phase of intellectual between brackets mind and Morontia between brackets soul liaison. And it was during the 33rd year of their sojourn in Dalmatia, long before the wall was completed, that number 2 and number 7 of the Danite group accidentally discovered a phenomenon attended upon the liaison of their Morontia selves, supposedly non-sexual and non-material, and the result of this adventure proved to be the first of the primary midway creatures. Later on we get to know more about midwayers. This new being was wholly visible to the planetary staff and to their celestial associates, but was not visible to the men and women of the various human tribes. Upon authority of the Planetary Prince, the entire corporal staff undertook the production of similar beings, and all were successful following the instructions of the pioneer Danite pair. Thus did the prince's staff eventually bring into being the original corpse of 50,000 primary midwayers. And midwayers, the word is already saying it, they were in between a material and spiritual state. So not really material and not really spiritual. Midway. These mid-type creatures were of great service in carrying on the affairs of the world's headquarters. They were invisible to human beings, but the primitive sojourners at Dalmatia were taught about these unseen semi-spirits, and for ages they constituted the sum total, better said, the sum total of the spirit world to these evolving mortals. 3. The Caligastia 100 were personally immortal or undying. There circulated through their material forms the antidotal complements of the life currents of the system, and had they not lost contact with the life circuits through rebellion, they would have lived on indefinitely until the arrival of a subsequent Son of God, or until their sometime later releases to resume the interrupted journey to Havona and Paradise. These antidotal complements of the Satania life currents were derived from the fruit of the tree of life, a shrub of Edentia, which was sent to Urantia by the Most Highs of Lanonandek. And the Most Highs of Lanonandek are actually Lanonandek Sons. And are not, we are using the term Most High, but if we are using actually the term or name Most High, we are actually referring to the Lanonandek Sons. But anyways, they are also a part of God, so in some way you also then refer to God. These antidotal complements of the Satania life currents were derived from the fruit of the tree of life, a shrub of Edentia, which was sent to Urantia by the Most Highs of Lanonandek at the time of Caligastia's arrival in the days of Dalmatia. This tree grew in the central courtyard of the temple of the unseen Father, and it was the fruit of the tree of life that enabled the material and otherwise mortal beings of the prince's staff to live on indefinitely as long as they had access to it. While of no value to the evolutionary races, this super sustenance was quite sufficient to confer continuous life upon the Caligastia 100 and also upon the 100 modified Andonites who were associated with them. It should be explained in this connection that at the time the 100 Andonites contributed their human germplasm to the members of the prince's staff. The life carriers introduced into their mortal bodies the complement of the system circuits, and thus were they enabled to live on concurrently with the staff, century after century, in defiance of physical death. Eventually, the 100 Andonites were made aware of their contribution to the new forms of their superiors, and these same 100 children of the Andon tribes were kept at headquarters as the personal attendants of the prince's corporal staff. And then 5. Organization of the 100. The 100 were organized for service in 10 autonomous councils of 10 members, each when 2 or more of these 10 councils met in joint session. Such liaison gatherings were presided over by Caligastia. These 10 groups were constituted as follows. 1. The Council on Food and Material Welfare. This group was presided over by Ang. Food, water, clothes, and the material advancement of the human species were fostered by this able corps. They taught well digging, spring control, and irrigation. So now we get to know a deeper background and understanding from where we got this knowledge from in irrigation, creating irrigations, digging, making fire, spring control, and so on. And I truly have the idea that these councils are still in existence, and in some way, shape or form that we are still seeing them working out, but in a distorted, perverted version. They taught those from the higher altitudes and from the north improved methods of treating skins for use as clothing, and weaving was later introduced by the teachers of art and science. Wow. Great advances were made in methods of food storage. Food was preserved by cooking, drying, and smoking. It thus became the earliest property. Man was taught to provide for the hazards of famine, which periodically decimated the world. 2. The Board of Animal Domestication and Utilization. This council was dedicated to the task of selecting and breeding those animals best adapted to help human beings in bearing burdens and transporting themselves to supply food, and later on to be of service in the cultivation of the soil. This able corps was directed by Bon. Several types of useful animals now extinct were tamed, together with some that have continued as domesticated animals to the present day. Man had long lived with the dog, and the blue man had already been successful in taming the elephant. The cow was so improved by careful breeding as to become a valuable source of food. Butter and cheese became common articles of human diet. Men were taught to use oxen for burden bearing, but the horse was not domesticated until a later time. The members of this corps first taught men to use the wheel for the facilitation of traction. It was in these days that carrier pigeons were first used, being taken on long journeys for the purposes of sending messages or calls for help. Bond's group were successful in training the great Fandors, and this is funny because from what I can remember, the birds in the movie Avatar were also called Fandors, but I'm not really 100% sure about that. But every time if they speak about these big birds, the Avatar movie comes up in my mind. So some person, this George Lucas, is in the know, and he gets some information, otherwise he could not make such movie. As passenger birds, but they became extinct more than 30,000 years ago. So now we get a deeper understanding where all these themes are coming from that Hollywood is presenting to us. And the never-ending story, this flying dog, that helps this boy transporting from one place to another place, the big birds in the Avatar movie, and so on, so on. There are so many movies that have topics in them that actually tell a deeper story about this planet, about the progressing of life forms on this planet, and about us, humanity themselves. So 3, the advisors regarding the conquest of predatory animals. That is the third group. It was not enough that early man should try to domesticate certain animals, but he must also learn how to protect himself from destruction by the remainder of the hostile animal world. This group was captained by Don. The purpose of an ancient city wall was to protect against ferocious beasts as well as to prevent surprise attacks by hostile humans. Those living without the walls and in the forest were dependent on tree dwellings, stone huts, and the maintenance of night fires. It was therefore very natural that these teachers should devote much time to instructing their pupils in the improvement of human dwellings by employing improved techniques and by the use of traps. Great progress was made in animal subjugation. The fourth group is the faculty on dissemination and conservation of knowledge. This group organized and directed the purely educational endeavors of those early ages. It was presided over by FAD, F-A-D. The educational methods of FAD consisted in a supervision of employment accompanied by instruction in improved methods of labor. FAD formulated the first alphabet and introduced a writing system. This alphabet contained 25 characters. And so now you can see that the entire book of Enoch also has a lot of distortions in it. It's being said that the fallen sons of God has taught humans all these things. But now we get a deeper understanding that it's not the fallen sons of God at all that has taught the human race all these things. So now the whole book of Enoch also comes into a different light, so to say. It has some truths in it, but also for this book counts, go with a sieve through it and take the things out that are containing higher spiritual truths. For writing material, these early peoples utilized tree barks, clay tablets, and stone slabs. And now we get to know why these digital things are called tablets. And the birch tree is actually a favorable tree from which they also produce paper, because it's the bark of birch tree is very strong and suitable for also starting up fire. A form of perkament made of hammered hides and a crude form of paper-like material made from wasps' nests. Wow. The Dalmatia library, destroyed soon after the Caligastia disaffection, comprised more than 2 million separate records and was known as the House of Fat. The blue man was partial to alphabet writing and made the greatest progress along such lines. The red man preferred pictorial writing, while the yellow races drifted into the use of symbols for words and ideas, much like those they now employ. But the alphabet and much more was subsequently lost to the world during the confusion attendant upon rebellion. The Caligastia defection destroyed the hope of the world for a universal language, which is the language of Nebadon, at least for untold ages. And Nebadon is the local universe of which this planet Urantia is part of. 5. The Commission, this is the 5th board or group, the Commission on Industry and Trade. This council was employed in fostering industry within the tribes and in promoting trade between the various peace groups. Its leader was Nod, N-O-D. Every form of primitive manufacture was encouraged by this corps. They contributed directly to the elevation of standards of living by providing many new commodities to attract the fancy of primitive man. They greatly expanded the trade in the improved salt produced by the Council on Science and Art. And Nod was actually a leader of the Nodite tribes. The land of Nod, that's the land of the Nodites. It was among these enlightened groups educated in the Dalmatia schools that the first commercial credit was practiced. From a central exchange of credits, they secured tokens which were accepted in lieu of the actual objects of barter. The world did not improve upon these business methods for hundreds of thousands of years. And the sixth council is the College of Revealed Religion. This body was slow in functioning. Urantia's civilization was literally forged out between the anvil of necessity and the hammers of fear. But this group had made considerable progress in their attempt to substitute creator fear for creature fear, between brackets ghost worship, and later on there's a whole paper about ghost worship and so on. Before their labors were interrupted by the later confusion attendant upon the succession upheaval. The head of this council was Hap, H-A-P. None of the prince's staff would present revelation to complicate evolution. They presented revelation only as the climax of their exhaustion of the forces of evolution, but Hap did yield to the desire of the inhabitants of the city for the establishment of a form of religious service. His group provided the Dalmatians with the 7 chants of worship and also gave them the daily praise phrase, and eventually taught them, between quotation marks, the first Father's prayer, which was, Father of all, whose Son we honor, look down upon us with favor, deliver us from the fear of all save you. Make us a pleasure to our divine teachers, and forever put truth on our lips. Deliver us from violence and anger. Give us respect for our elders and that which belongs to our neighbors. Give us this season green pastures and fruitful flocks to gladden our hearts. We pray for the hastening of the coming of the promised uplifter, and we would do your will on this world as others do on worlds beyond. Amen. Although the prince's staff were limited to natural means and ordinary methods of race improvement, they held out the promise of the Adamic gift of a new race as the goal of subsequent evolutionary growth upon the attainment of the height of biologic development. And then the 7th council is the guardians of health and life. This council was concerned with the introduction of sanitation and the promotion of primitive hygiene, and was led by Lut, L-U-T. So here we get the information where the knowledge comes from, that is all about hygiene. So now we know who have and has taught us all about sanitation. Its members taught much that was lost during the confusion of subsequent ages, never to be rediscovered until the 20th century. They taught mankind that cooking, boiling and roasting was a means of avoiding sickness, also that such cooking greatly reduced infant mortality and facilitated early weaning. Many of the early teachings of Lutz guardians of health persisted among the tribes of earth on down to the days of Moses, even though they became much garbled and were greatly changed. So this food law and hygiene laws mentioned in Exodus, Leviticus, and so on are actually very distorted representations of the original health regulations and laws presented by Lut's guardians. So what we read in the book of Leviticus and Exodus and in the other one of the 5 books of the Old Testament, know that it is very much garbled and distorted greatly. So you better can ask, and this is what I came to learn quite a while ago, when I go to the supermarket or grocery store, I ask God the Father what He wants me to buy, what He wants me to eat. And if you do such a thing, then you only buy the things that you truly need and is good for you. The great obstacle in the way of promoting hygiene among these ignorant peoples consisted in the fact that the real causes of many diseases were too small to be seen by the naked eye, and also because they all held fire in superstitious regard. It required thousands of years to persuade them to burn refuse. In the meantime, they were urged to bury their decaying rubbish. The great sanitary advance of this epoch came from the dissemination of knowledge regarding the health-giving and disease-destroying properties of sunlight. Before the prince's arrival, bathing had been an exclusively religious ceremonial. It was indeed difficult to persuade primitive men to wash their bodies as a health practice. Lut finally induced the religious teachers to include cleansing with water as a part of the purification ceremonies to be practiced in connection with the noontime devotions once a week in the worship of the Father of all. And now we may leave that all behind. We do not have to do the things from that perspective anymore. We now know that bathing is good for us, and we don't have to link it anymore with religious ceremonies. Lut used this as a tool to make the primitive humans do something that was very good for them to do. These guardians of health also sought to introduce handshaking in substitution for saliva exchange, or blood drinking as a seal of personal friendship and as a token of group loyalty. But when out from under the compelling pressure of the teachings of their superior leaders, these primitive peoples were not slow in reverting to their former health-destroying and disease-breeding practices of ignorance and superstition. Point 8. The Planetary Council on Art and Science is the 8th council. This corps did much to improve the industrial technique of early man and to elevate his concepts of beauty. Their leader was Mek, M-E-K. Art and science were at a low ebb throughout the world, but the rudiments of physics and chemistry were taught the Dalmatians. Pottery was advanced, decorative arts were all improved, and the ideals of human beauty were greatly enhanced. But music made little progress until after the arrival of the violet race. After the arrival of Adam and Eve, the material son and daughter, these primitive men would not consent to experiment with steam power Notwithstanding the repeated urgings of their teachers, never could they overcome their great fear of the explosive power of confined steam. They were, however, finally persuaded to work with the metals and fire, although a piece of red-hot metal was a terrorizing object to early men. Mac did a great deal to advance the culture of the Andonites and to improve the art of the blue man. A blend of the blue man with the Andon stock produced an artistically gifted type, and many of them became master sculptors. So those in this world nowadays whom are great sculptors, you need to ask yourself the question, which human strains are dominant in you? So this is interesting, really it is. They did not work in stone or marble, but their works of clay, hardened by baking, adorned the gardens of Dalmatia. Great progress was made in the home arts, of which were lost in the long and dark ages of rebellion, never to be rediscovered until modern times. 9. The Council of the Governors of Advanced Tribal Relations. This was the group entrusted with the work of bringing human society up to the level of statehood. Their chief was Tut, T-U-T. These leaders contributed much to bringing about intertribal marriages. They fostered courtship and marriage after due deliberation and full opportunity to become acquainted. The purely military war dances were refined and made to serve valuable social ends. Many competitive games were introduced, but these ancient folk were a serious people. Little humor graced these early tribes. Few of these practices survived the subsequent disintegration of planetary insurrection. Tut and his associates labored to promote group associations of a peaceful nature, to regulate and humanize warfare, to coordinate intertribal relations, and to improve tribal governments. In the vicinity of Dalmatia there developed a more advanced culture, and these improved social relations were very helpful in influencing more remote tribes. But the pattern of civilization prevailing at the prince's headquarters was quite different from the barbaric society evolving elsewhere, just as the 20th century society of Cape Town, South Africa, is totally unlike the crude culture of the diminutive Bushmen to the north. And then the 10th Council, the Supreme Court of Tribal Coordination and Racial Cooperation. This Supreme Council was directed by Van Victor by Van V-A-N, and was the court of appeals for all of the other 9 special commissions charged with the supervision of human affairs. This council was one of wide function, being entrusted with all matters of earthly concern which were not specifically assigned to the other groups. This selected corps had been approved by the Constellation Fathers of Edentia before they were authorized to assume the functions of the Supreme Court of Urantia. 6. The Prince's reign. The degree of a world's culture is measured by the social heritage of its native beings, and the rate of cultural expansion is wholly determined by the ability of its inhabitants to comprehend new and advanced ideas. Slavery to tradition produces stability and cooperation by sentimentally linking the past with the present, but It likewise stifles initiatives and enslaves the creative powers of the personality. The whole world was caught in the stalemate of tradition-bound Moors when the Caligastia 100 arrived and began the proclamation of the new gospel of individual initiative within the social groups of that day. But this beneficent rule was soon interrupted, that the races never have been wholly liberated from the slavery of custom. Fashion still unduly dominates Urantia. The Caligastia 100 graduates of the Satania mentioned worlds well knew the arts and culture of Jerusalem, but such knowledge is nearly valueless on a barbaric planet populated by primitive humans. These wise beings knew better than to undertake the sudden transformation for the en masse uplifting of the primitive races of that day. They well understood the slow evolution of the human species, and they wisely refrained from any radical attempts at modifying man's mode of life on Earth. Each of the 10 planetary commissions set about slowly and naturally to advance the interests entrusted to them. Their plan consisted in attracting the best minds of the surrounding tribes and, after training them, sending them back to their people as emissaries of social uplift. Foreign emissaries were never sent to a race except upon the specific request of that people. Those who labored for the uplift and advancement of a given tribe or race were always natives of that tribe or race. The 100 would not attempt to impose the habits and mores of even superior race upon another tribe. Always they patiently worked to uplift and advance the time-tried Moors of Earth, of each race. The simple folk of Urantia brought their social customs to Dalmatia, not to exchange them for new and better practices, but to have them uplifted by contact with a higher culture and by association with superior minds. The process was slow but very effectual. The Dalmatia teachers sought to add conscious social selection to the purely natural selection of biologic evolution. They did not derange human society, but they did markedly accelerate its normal and natural evolution. Their motive was progression by evolution and not revolution by revelation. The human race had spent ages in acquiring the little religion and morals it had, and these supermen knew better than to rob mankind of these few advances by the confusion and dismay which always result when enlightened and superior beings undertake to uplift the backward races by overteaching and over-enlightenment. When Christian missionaries go into the heart of Africa or South America or India, where sons and daughters are supposed to remain under the control and direction of their parents throughout the lifetime of the parents, they only bring about confusion and the breakdown of all authority when they seek, in a single generation, to supplant this practice by teaching that these children should be free from all parental restraint after they have attained the age of 21. Point 7. Life in Dalmatia. The prince's headquarters, though exquisitely beautiful and designed to awe The primitive man of that age was altogether modest. The buildings were not especially large, as it was the motive of these important teachers to encourage the eventual development of agriculture through the introduction of animal husbandry. The land provision within the city walls was sufficient to provide for pasturage and gardening for the support of a population of about 20,000. The inferiors of the central temple of worship and the 10 council mansions of the supervising groups of supermen were indeed beautiful works of art, and while the residential buildings were models of neatness and cleanliness, everything was very simple and altogether primitive in comparison with later-day developments. At this headquarters of culture, no methods were employed which did not naturally belong to and on Urantia. The prince's corporal staff presided over simple and exemplary abodes which they maintained as homes designed to inspire and favorably impress the student observer sojourning at the world's social center and educational headquarters. The definitive order of family life and the living of one family together in one residence of comparatively settled location date from these times of Dalmatia and were chiefly due to the example and teachings of the 100 and their pupils. The home as a social unit never became a successful and a great success until the supermen and superwomen of Dalmatia led mankind to love and plan for their grandchildren and their grandchildren's children. Savage man loves his child, but civilized man loves also his grandchild. The prince's staff lived together as fathers and mothers. True, they had no children of their own, but the 50 pattern homes of Dalmatia never sheltered less than 500 adopted little ones, assembled from the superior families of the Andonic and Sangik races. Many of these children were orphans. They were favored with the discipline and training of these super parents, and then after 3 years in the schools of the prince, they entered from 13 to 15. They were eligible for marriage and ready to receive their commissions as emissaries of the prince to the needy tribes of their respective races. Vaat sponsored the Dalmatia plan of teaching that was carried out as an industrial school in which the pupils learned by doing and through which they worked their way by the daily performance of useful tasks. This plan of education did not ignore thinking and feeling in the development of character, but it gave first place to the manual training. The instruction was individual and collective. The pupils were taught by both men and women and by the two acting conjointly. One half of this group instruction was by sexes, the other half was conjointly and the other half was co-educational. Students were taught manual dexterity as individuals and were socialized in groups or classes. They were trained to fraternize with younger groups, older groups and adults, as well as to do teamwork with those of their own ages. They were also familiarized with such associations as family groups, play squads and school classes. Among the latest students trained in Mesopotamia for work with their respective races were Andonites from the highlands of western India, together with representatives of the red man and the blue man. Still later, a small number of the yellow races were also received. Hop presented the early races with a moral law. This code was known as the Father's Way and consisted of the following 7 commands. 1. You shall not fear nor serve any god but the Father of all. 2. You shall not disobey the Father's Son, the world's ruler, nor show disrespect to his superhuman associates. 3. You shall not speak a lie when called before the judges of the people. 4. You shall not kill men, women, or children. And 5. You shall not steal your neighbor's goods or cattle. And 6. You shall not touch your friend's wife. 7. You shall not show disrespect to your parents or to the elders of the tribe. This was the law of Dalmatia for almost 300,000 years, and many of the stones on which this law was inscribed now lie beneath the waters of the shores of Mesopotamia and Persia. It became the custom to hold one of these commands in mind for each day of the week, using it for salutations and mealtime thanksgiving. The time measurement of these days was the lunar month, this period being reckoned as 28 days, that with the exception of day and night was the only time reckoning known to the early peoples. The 7-day week was introduced by the Dalmatia teachers and grew out of the fact that 7 was 1/4 of 28. The significance of the number 7 in the super-universe undoubtedly afforded them opportunity to introduce a spiritual reminder into the common reckoning of time, but there is no natural origin for the weekly period. The country around the city was quite well settled within a radius of 100 miles. Immediately surrounding the city, hundreds of graduates of the prince's schools engaged in animal husbandry and otherwise carried out the instruction they had received from his staff and their numerous human helpers. A few engaged in agriculture and horticulture. Mankind was not consigned to agricultural toil as the penalty of supposed sin, which is being stated in the Bible. So this is truly a distortion, this sentence. In the sweat of your face shall you eat the fruit of the fields was not a sentence of punishment pronounced because of man's participation in the follies of the Lucifer rebellion under the leadership of the traitorous Caligastia. The cultivation of the soil is inherent in the establishment of an advancing civilization on the evolutionary worlds, and this injunction was the center of all teaching of the Planetary Prince and his staff throughout the 300,000 years which intervened between their arrival on Urantia and those tragic days when Caligastia threw in his lot with the rebel Lucifer. Work with the soil is not a curse, rather is it the highest blessing to all who are thus permitted to enjoy the most human of all human activities. At the outbreak of the rebellion, Dalmatia had a resident population of almost 6,000. This number includes the regular students but does not embrace the visitors and observers who always numbered more than 1,000. but you can have little or no concept of the marvelous progress of those faraway times. Practically all of the wonderful human gains of those days were wiped out by the horrific and horrible confusion and abject spiritual darkness which followed the Caligastia catastrophe of deception and sedition. And we are still in it. We are still outliving this confusion and abject spiritual darkness. Though I truly believe that we are in the last stages of this, and that we are seeing being outlived the last contractions of this rebellion. 8, and the last subchapter of this paper. Misfortunes of Caligastia. In looking back over the long career of Caligastia, we find only one outstanding feature of his conduct that might have challenged attention. He was ultra-individualistic. He was inclined to take sides with almost every party of protest, and he was usually sympathetic with those who gave mild expression to implied criticism. We detect the early appearance of this tendency to be restless under authority, to mildly resent all forms of supervision, while slightly resentful of senior counsel and somewhat restive under superior authority. Nonetheless, whenever a test had come, he had always proved loyal to the universe rulers and obedient to the mandates of the constellation fathers. No real fault was ever found in him up to the time of his shameful betrayal of Urantia. It should be noted that both Lucifer and Caligastia had been patiently instructed and lovingly warned respecting their critical tendencies and the subtle development of their pride of self and its associated exaggeration of the feeling of self-importance. And now we get a deeper understanding of the deeply rooted self-importance that is still being played out through things such as so-called selfies, and why many of us still find it important to show ourselves in many ways, shape and forms on social medias in ways that are actually disgusting and are actually in no way, shape or form a representation of a human being that should actually follow the spiritual guidance of the Father and become step by step a more mature spiritual being. But all of these attempts to help have been misconstrued, as both Caligastia and Lucifer judged their friendly advisors as being actuated by the very reprehensible motives which were beginning to dominate their own distorted thinking and misguided planning. They judged their unselfish advisors by their own evolving selfishness. From the arrival of Prince Caligastia, planetary civilization progressed in a fairly normal manner for almost 300,000 years. Aside from being a life modification sphere and therefore subject to numerous irregularities and unusual episodes of evolutionary fluctuation, Urantia progressed very satisfactorily in its planetary career up to the times of the Lucifer rebellion and the concurrent Caligastia betrayal. All subsequent history has been definitely modified by this catastrophic blunder, as well as by the later failure of Adam and Eve to fulfill their planetary mission. The Prince of Urantia went into darkness at the time of the Lucifer rebellion, thus precipitating the long confusion of the planet. He was subsequently deprived of sovereign authority by the coordinate action of the constellation rulers and other universe authorities. He shared the inevitable vicissitudes of isolated Urantia down to the time of Adam's sojourn on the planet and contributed something to the miscarriage of the plan to uplift the mortal races through the infusion of the lifeblood of the new violet race, the descendants of Adam and Eve. So Caligastia also had a hand in, in this whole plan too. But as we get to know later on about the default of Adam and Eve, then you get a better understanding what truly happened in the garden, in the first Garden of Eden. The power of the fallen prince to disturb human affairs was enormously curtailed by the mortal incarnation of Machiventa, Melchizedek in the days of Abraham, and subsequently during the life of Michael in the flesh. This traitorous prince was finally shorn of all authority on Urantia. The doctrine of a personal devil on Urantia, though it had some foundation in the planetary presence of the traitorous and iniquitous Caligastia, was nevertheless wholly fictitious in its teachings that such a, between quotation marks, devil could influence the normal human mind against its free and natural choosing. Even before Michael's bestowal on Urantia, neither Caligastia nor Daligastia was ever able to oppress mortals or to coerce any normal individual into doing anything against the human will. The free will of human is supreme in moral affairs. Even the indwelling thought adjuster refuses to compel man to think a single thought or to perform a single act against the choosing of man's own will. And now this rebel of the realm, shorn of all power to harm his former subjects, awaits the final adjudication by the Uversa Ancients of Days of all who participated in the Lucifer Rebellion. And with this said, I have come to the end of reading paper 66, and all the information in this paper has been presented to us by a loving and beautiful Melchizedek of Nebadon, and I truly want to say my thanksgiving to this Melchizedek of Nebadon. Thank you so much for giving us this information, which helps us, the children of God here on Urantia, to get a deeper understanding and background of what truly has happened on this planet, and also a deeper understanding and background why this world is still in a on a path of backwardness instead of forwardness, and why the things are still happening as they are happening nowadays. And I also want to say thank you to all those who have listened to this audio video. Thank you for taking your time in hearing this information, and know that if you do not directly understand this, your soul does, your spirit does for certain. And don't worry, because if you go to the first mentioned world, then all this information will come back to you, and then you will get a better understanding of what these words have been taught to you, and have taught to you, better said. I wish you all a beautiful day and God bless you.